So, hi everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Claire, and I'm a board member with Alberta Food Matters. And welcome to our second meet and greet series. Just want to let everyone know that this session is probably going to be about an hour long. I know in the Eventbrite it's at about an hour and a half. And if you need to step out at any time, feel free to do so. No worries. Okay. All right, so we have three speakers for this evening. And I'd like to begin our event by recognizing the traditional territory of the Indigenous people in Canada. And we take part in an act of reconciliation, honoring the land and Indigenous presence. Okay, so I thought it might be a good starting point to just explain why we are doing this meet and greet series. So there are so many organizations in Alberta that work around food, and there's so many that it's hard to get to know each other. So this meet and greet series will provide an opportunity for the organizations to properly introduce themselves, so we can build connections, and it supports networking, and also it's a time where they can answer questions from attendees. All right. So we're going to get started just into our first speaker, which is, actually, not yet. Alberta Food Matters, that's our organization that's hosting this webinar. And if you'd like to connect with us, we have many social media platforms as well. You can sign up for our newsletter on our website. Okay, all right. Without further ado, we have our first speaker from Bow Valley Food Alliance. Lauren, over to you.
Great. Thanks so much, Claire. It's nice to be here and see so many faces, some familiar and some new. So hello to everyone. So I'm a board member with the Bow Valley Food Alliance. And I am going to first talk a little bit about the background and a little bit of history of the Bow Valley Food Alliance, and then talk about how COVID has impacted our organization, which I think is what all the speakers are talking about. But yeah, to start. So the Bow Valley Food Alliance was established in 2016 when the town of Vamp community development staff brought together a Bow Valley-wide group of agencies, including health and municipal staff, concerned citizens, social activists, and some other food-related organization. It was really open to everyone, and it was really innovative because it was Bow Valley wide, and this was partly because of this recognition that in order to address food insecurity and food issues, that we really needed to take more of a regional approach. So even though it started in the town of Banff, which we're really grateful for, they started with this very, I think, forward-thinking approach that allowed us to come together as a broader region. So we started in 2016, and then by 2018, there was informal membership of about 50 people who worked to create a framework in terms of reference. And around that same time in 2018, the Bow Valley Food Alliance became more engaged with the concept of food sovereignty. Originally, the focus had really been around food security. And while certainly we still remain concerned with food security, I think this engagement with food sovereignty meant that we expanded sort of this original focus on increasing access to affordable, nutritious, and culturally appropriate food to consider how do we create communities in which community members have the ability to determine what their food systems look like, not just in terms of what we can access, but also in relation to how food is produced, how food is processed, how it's transported, where it's sold, how it's prepared, and what happens when it becomes waste, and so on. And there was a very interesting moment at one of the meetings that I remember when we were talking about food sovereignty, where somebody in the group said, this has been the missing piece, this is really important. So I think that, for me at least, was I think an important point in our journey as an organization. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about how we've grown and changed, but I will do that in the next section, talking about answering the question of how has the pandemic impacted our organization. So first, in terms of our organizational structure, we've really grown and formalized over the course of COVID. Before the pandemic, we were a small working board with no staff and very, very limited funding. Presently, we have a working board of 7. We have 2 part-time staff, and I think we've brought in more funding than anyone could have or would have predicted before COVID. And that's really, I think, enabled us to do a lot more than when we were a much more loose sort of network of just different groups coming together to share ideas and thoughts. The pandemic has also impacted what our work looks like. I think we've definitely, or at least during the first, or during most of the pandemic, we've really focused or shifted our focus back to access to food and making sure that community members are fed. So this has meant that some of our other projects, such as the Bow Valley Food Charter, as well as some of our advocacy work, has been put on hold. We have been picking that work back up in the last while. But yeah, we really sort of, it's you have to meet immediate needs in the community, and I think a lot of folks have experienced that as well. And then the pandemic has also really impacted our understanding of ourselves as an organization, as well as how we understand food in the Valley. I know we've learned a lot of new things, which could take a very long time to go over, so I'll just highlight a few. But I also want to say that COVID has reinforced things that we already knew. So for example, before COVID, we knew that food insecurity was an issue in the Bow Valley. We knew that we know that it's directly tied to wages and housing costs. But as in many places, COVID really exacerbated food insecurity across the Bow Valley. And in our perspective, this was directly tied to high unemployment rates, rates that reached over 60% in Canmore and 85% in Vamp. We heard about situations from community partners that were at the same time totally bizarre and also, totally made sense when you knew the context, where community partners were delivering free and low cost meals to like really high end subdivisions during COVID. And this was, from what we understand at least, because there's so many limited housing options, particularly diverse housing options, for example, for families. So people often are paying very high rents in, for example, in fancy subdivisions. And when people were laid off or let go from work, they really started to face this, this choice, which we knew was happening before the pandemic as well, but this choice between, do I pay my super high rent or do I pay for food? And so people were accessing free and low cost meals in situations that I think we wouldn't have that makes sense, but are perhaps also surprising. Oh, I think my dog's coming in. And I think, this reflects things that we knew before the pandemic as well, that, to people who are experiencing food insecurity and who work in relation to these issues, it's really visible, but to those who are in more privileged positions, food insecurity in a community like in communities like the Bow Valley, especially like Canmore and Banff, where there's a lot of wealth, that sometimes these issues are not very visible. And then, you can hear my kids are home. We also, I think, learned during the pandemic how important it is for networks like ours to focus on connecting and coordinating around food within our communities. So even though it was our partners who were on the front lines who were doing the most difficult work, like delivering food hampers and meals and that kind of thing, the Bow Valley Food Alliance, we were in the background, we were writing funding applications, we were connecting individuals and groups who were doing similar kinds of work. We were trying to provide updated information related to food programs and emergency supports to the people who needed them. We were also speaking with a variety of different groups to figure out needs and gaps, and generally responding to many requests for increased coordination, information, and guidance from community members, as well as from a variety of different groups and organizations. So I think it just reinforced our understanding that this work is important. I think we also learned that this kind of work is often undervalued. Making relationships and building relationships can seem very airy-fairy in some ways. But in our experience, it's really integral. Um, we also learned that even when this kind of work is valued, that often people assume it can sort of just happen off the side of people's desks. I remember someone saying to us, like, well, you've been doing all this work as volunteers, because we didn't have a staff person until, a month or two into the pandemic. Like, you don't need a staff person, do you? And those of us who had been involved were just like, we are going to burn out. Like, this is hard work. It needs time and resources to be committed, in order to do this work meaningfully. And it's we need to recognize that. So I think for us, having an established framework for coordination around food that's ongoing and in regular use, no matter the context, is really integral to responding to emergencies and situations like COVID. We had some of that capacity. We already existed before the pandemic, and I think, I'm obviously tooting my own horn here a bit, but or the Bow Valley Food Alliance's horn a bit here. But we asked you, like, what would have happened if we weren't around when COVID hit? Because it's really difficult to adequately mobilize when, during an emergency or an unforeseen event, when you don't have relationships and connections within the community, because it takes time to build those connections. And it can be really difficult, although certainly not impossible, to build trusting relationships, particularly when people don't have enough to eat and are scrambling to make ends meet. And those are the people generally who, we need to be connected with and talking with. And so just as I said, it's in order to connect and build relationships, it's really important to devote time and resources to that. And for us, this has meant often that we do so with through a paid staff, and currently 2 paid staff, which is amazing. And then I also want to say, this connection and coordination work wouldn't mean anything without all of the work that is happening on a grassroots level in our community. So I want to just give such a big shout out to all the groups that we've worked with. I see Alana on the call. I see some folks who are on the call. So I really appreciate all that grassroots work, especially those who are really innovative and saw needs and gaps in the community and organized to fill those gaps. I know in Vamp, at least, the food bank shut down because a lot of the volunteers were seniors, and for very good reasons. They did not want to be out in the community when COVID hit, and groups such as Vamp Food Rescue really mobilized to fill that gap. We also, organization of the Rocky Mountains, as well as Ethiopia, fill gaps, delivering culturally appropriate food hampers to a variety of communities in the Bow Valley. And again, I just think it's really important to highlight this kind of work, because often it's not seen by people in more privileged positions of power. People automatically or often think of food banks, which are really important, but are not necessarily, are not meeting all of our community needs, if I'm going to be perfectly honest, although they do important work for sure. And then just to I guess, end, I want to say that COVID also highlighted the importance of having a community-based framework like our Bow Valley Food Alliance Charter, which outlines sort of what we value in relation to the food system. And if anybody wants to take a look at that while I'm finishing up here, I'll just pop the link in the chat there. And so before COVID, we hosted a variety of community conversations about food, and we asked community members, what did they value in relation to food? What did they think was important, and how did they envision food systems in the future? We also provided take-home kits for people to fill out themselves or with a group. So if they didn't have a chance to attend one of our public events, they could still participate. And so based on those conversations, which occurred over about, I think, 1.5 years or 2 years, again, before COVID, we came up with this food charter, which is a work in progress. But again, I think without this charter, we would have felt a lot less confident in doing some of the connecting and coordinating work that we did. We met a lot of people through the process as well. But I think it was really important for us to have, an understanding, to start with an understanding of, what are the values around food that are shared by our community, which, you know, we had a chance to think about and talk about, and then articulate through the food charter. And I think understanding these values has really enabled us to do our work better, both throughout the pandemic and continuing on. So I wanted to leave some time for questions. I don't know if you want to do questions now, but I didn't want to talk the whole time. So yeah.
Yes, yeah. After each speaker has their say, then we can have a question period. Thank you, Lauren.
Thanks, Claire.
So if you have any questions for Lauren, feel free to unmute yourself and speak, or you can use the group chat function.
So I was wondering about local food procurement, and I have read your food charter, but I can't remember. So what was the focus of, did you go with local food procurement, or was that too challenging seeing as you guys are in the mountains?
I mean, that's an excellent question. And I think it's something, well, Abby can add on if she wants as well, because she's an expert. So it really depended on the initiative. It's something that has been really important. We did have our local urban farmer last summer was providing some locally grown food to the food bank and a few other organizations. And we supported that in a few different ways, although it would have been nice to support it further as well. We have also worked with Avni and the Organic Box as we've been doing some of the Good Food Box ordering and trying to order from more diverse suppliers. And so, yeah, I mean, it's a constant, it's difficult in the mountains because we're surrounded by a lot of parks, which is great in many instances, but means that food production isn't happening here as much. We did also work with, at the beginning of the pandemic, community gardens who weren't sure if they would be able to continue or not with COVID. And so we worked with them to provide some resources shared by other networks to sort of just to support them in saying, like, it is possible, like, to continue growing food and having communities grow food. This is what some other places are doing. We also advocated for the like the farmers market, which is called the Canmore Mountain Market, to happen in Canmore, so that, because that's one of the key locations where people have access to local food. Our coordinator, Cody, our first coordinator, Cody, who's on the call, organized some community markets throughout the first winter of COVID that provided sliding scale subsidy. So it was local producers selling, and then community members could come and say how much money they would like to spend on a sliding scale. So it's been a focus, but it's hard, and we do see our localness as, or like local food, we see that as broader, like not just Bow Valley wide. We see that more regionally, if that makes sense.
May I speak? I wanted to say also that one thing that the Bow Valley Food Alliance did was provide a grant in kind of to the Santa's Anonymous in Banff, and Banff Lake Louise for Christmas. And that was gift certificates for Valbella, which is a very well-liked food processor in Canmore that provides very good quality food. And so Santa's Anonymous was able to give those to some of our recipients. And I can tell you from doing the survey of the people that received the Santa's Anonymous gift certificates that they were thrilled to have them. So it served two purposes really, which was, one was providing people with a means to buy food, but the second was, it was like an actual gift that provided joy, that they were getting these certificates to a place that some of those folks really regarded as a treat. And so it was their Christmas treat at a time when Christmas was quite bleak last year.
Yeah, thank you for that, Marion. That's a really good a good example. And I think also, you know, that it like it also supported local food processors and small businesses who, you know, and that's part of our mission too, right? And thinking about sort of the food system.
Exactly. It's part of supporting people that process food within the valley and allow them to operate well, and then they provide employment, and they were generous to the valley with donating foods and in other circumstances as well through COVID. So it all kind of reinforced each other.
Totally.
And I'm also wondering about the food rescue. So is that rescued food just from grocery stores, or is it like, do the schools compost go to farmers, or just wondering about that?
I don't, Alana is on the call and she runs Vamp Food Rescue. So I don't know, Alana, if you want to respond because you are the expert. I will start talking, and if you'd like to jump in, Alana, you're welcome to. So I'm actually, I don't live in Vamp. Alana, go ahead.
I'm available. I'm sorry, I'm just not available by video. Some of you may or may not know I take care of my severely handicapped sister. So that's part of why I don't have my screen on, but hopefully you can hear me. So the question, I believe, was where do we access the food for Vamp Food Rescue? So I'll tell you that initially we received it from one of the main grocery stores in Vamp. Then we moved on to the second grocery store in Banff. You know, so it's been a bit of a process. We opened our venture in 2016. And, you know, it takes time to build these processes. So we developed the 2 grocery stores. Now we've taken on some of the bakeries. We also have gotten rescue food from businesses that actually closed down during the pandemic. And we've done more than just our evening distribution. A lot of people know us for that, where we're open Monday, Wednesday, and Friday for evening distribution, but we also support the seniors, the daycare, the little pantry at the library. And to close the loop, anything left over goes to a farmer, and the farmer feeds the food to the cows, pigs, and chickens. So we definitely have a closed loop, and it's worked out very nicely for us.
Thank you, Elena, for answering that question much better than I could.
And Lauren, I'm just going to quickly interject just to say that Alana has worked so hard for many years to get that program going. So it wasn't, Alana maybe made it sound a little bit easier than I know how much work she's done in the background.
Thank you very, very much, Bow Valley Food Alliance. We're happy to have you. And thank you so much once again, Lauren. I do not mean to interject, but I want to move on because our next speaker wanted to respect the time. Question period after the event, for sure, we can answer any questions afterwards. All right, so our next speaker is from the Community Food Connection Association. All right, over to you, Allison.
Okay, hi, thank you everybody. And sorry, I'm on a bit of a schedule here. I just picked up one kid from dance and then I have to take another kid to fencing at 5:45. So, but this is the beauty of Zoom, right? So you can come in, do your spiel and then go out. But I'm just gonna, sorry, I'm just trying to see people here. Okay, so I'm in Medicine Hat. Community Food Connections Association became incorporated in 2003. The program started though in 2000, just kind of like through, it was back before when we had regional health boards. And so the dietitians under the regional health board were doing food programming. And then they developed an actual we're not-for-profit society and became incorporated under the Societies Act in 2003. So we run, I used to say 3 main programs, but actually it's 4 now. So we run the Good Food Club, which is a wholesale produce purchasing club. I know a lot of you are familiar with Good Food Clubs. Calgary has a huge one that serves outlying communities. So we have one here in Medicine Hat. We focus really on local food. We're really lucky, really fortunate here in Medicine Hat to have access to a lot of local growers. We have a huge greenhouse industry. We also have a lot of Hutterite colonies around Medicine Hat in the area that grow produce for like market garden produce and sell through some of the grocery stores, and we purchase directly from them as well. And then we have several wholesalers in the city. We have to always buy our fruit from out of area just because nobody local grows fruit in the way that we would need to purchase it for that. But we do have wholesalers we can purchase fruit through that. So we run that once a month. It's the second Thursday of each month. We run out of a church hall. Pre-COVID, we had 10 depots around the city where people could pick up their boxes. Because a lot of those were in schools and in office settings that are now no longer open to the public, we are just open our main depot where we do the packing, and then a depot at the Redcliffe Public Library. So libraries, though, have been closed off and on during COVID, so we've had to find alternatives a few times there when they've been shut down. So we have a $10, $15, and $20 box, and we are able to get very good value, quite a lot in that. We do a price comparison each month, and typically people save anywhere, the lowest is around $5 on a $20 box, up to $20 on a $20 box. So if they were buying a comparable box in the grocery store, it would be $40. So I always tell people it's a good entry point for if you're wanting to eat healthier, because it's not a lot of cost, and it's an easy way to get more healthy food into your diet. So that's probably the first one. And then the next is community kitchens. So again, pre-COVID, we were running about 6 community kitchens that are open to anyone in the community. And then we help support another, I think 12 agency kitchens. So whether that be insurance for them to use another location, purchasing cooking supplies, some budgeting for food purchasing, just like a variety of ways, however they need support. Because of COVID, of course, we've not been able to run in person. So we've been doing some Zoom kitchens, but those have not been very popular. There are people who come to the kitchens because they need the food, but a lot of people come to the kitchens for the social aspect. And so that just doesn't happen in the same way on Zoom. We're anticipating our food bank in Medicine Hat has just moved into a new building where they were able to put in 4 learning kitchens similar to what's in a high school. And so we are anticipating moving in there in November, depending on our COVID numbers. I don't know if you're aware, Medicine Hat for a while had the highest rate per capita, or second highest only to Vamp in all of Canada. So it was not great. We're finally starting to go down. So we look to be doing that again. We run those just kind of general kitchens. One of them though is a vegetarian kitchen, and usually we try to work around people's dietary restrictions as well. And then of course we have community gardens. We have 2. One is an in-ground one, it's quite large. And then we have one with raised beds in another location. I think we have about 75 plots. We did have one in Redcliffe, but we actually turned the operation of that one over to the town of Redcliffe. It just made more sense because it was easier for them to deal with irrigation issues than for us to come in from Medicine Hat. And we also have a food forest, and we use it as a learning garden. And that is open to the public. And we run sometimes some daytime children's programming out of that space as well. So that's kind of the 3 biggest programs. And then additionally, we have, I teach a class called Healthy Eating on a Budget. It's kind of a standardized class, usually takes 1.5 to 2 hours. I teach it every month at the Detox and Rehab Center, and then I go into agencies like the Women's Shelter or family programs, things like that, and teach it as well. It's a lot of like shopping and menu planning, making substitutions, low-cost substitutions, that kind of thing. And then we run also, just looking at my list here. So we do community education programming. So typically what happens is I work with a lot of agencies and other like sustainability groups, and people will start asking for certain things. So something you touched on briefly there was food waste and food waste diversion. So we had people come to us in the community and say, what's happening with food waste in Medicine Hat? So then I went and I surveyed all the grocery stores, and I talked to the city of Medicine Hat about the recycling and composting program. And we have an organization called Prairie Gleaners that dehydrates food, and then it gets sent to places around the world when they have national or huge natural disasters. So then we got some speakers, and then we had a community event where we presented the findings to the community, along with some speakers talking about the impacts of food waste and methane production in landfills, and vermicomposting as an alternative, and just some different topics like that. So that's what we'll do, things like that. And then every spring we do CD Saturday. This year we used the little free libraries around the city to do a contactless CD Saturday, and we used the resources from Seeds of Diversity to offer online Zoom webinars or classes for people to have some learning opportunities as well. So we've been trying to work around those limitations of COVID where we can't gather in person. And then we encourage people to use a website called ripenear.me for sharing when they have excess fruit, trees or bushes in their yards. They can post it on there, and then people in the community can look and go and pick. So we've been trying to get the city to map their fruit trees and bushes for years. We have to get a bylaw changed as well, though, because currently you're not allowed to pick stuff off of public property. So we've been working on that one for a long time, but this is for on private property. So we encourage people to use that. And the last thing we do, well, it's not the last thing, but another big thing we do is every 2 years I update a local food directory. So I'm sure people in other communities get calls like, where's a U-Pick that I can go to, or where can I find this item? And so before my time, someone had done one, but it wasn't exactly like a producer's directory. And so a couple of years ago, maybe 3 years ago, I kind of started from scratch and redid it, and then updated it last summer. And it's got farm gate sales, because we have all the greenhouses. A lot of them have these like little kiosks. They're 24-hour kiosks, and you just put money in a like a metal container, and you take the items that are priced there. And so those are all listed in that. Local honey sales, eggs and meat, as well as we wanted to keep it culturally relevant. So we made sure people know where the closest kosher and halal foods were available as well. And so I think that's kind of it. I feel like I've sped through a lot of things, but those are kind of our main programs that we run here. And we work a lot with other community organizations to offer programming, because I'm the only employee and I am only 20 hours a week. And so this would be completely unattainable running all of this stuff without tons of volunteers and lots of staff from other agencies that I work with all the time. So does anyone have any questions?
What is the population of Medicine Hat?
Well, there's differing views on that. StatsCan, I think, has a different number than our city census, but around 65,000.
So do you work with FCSS, or like, are they, okay, quite a bit?
Yeah, so we had FCSS funding for a while. Then we didn't have it for a couple of years, and then this year we just got it again. So we are mostly staffing is funded through FCSS. We also have a small from Alberta Health Services, Health in Action, I think it's called, grant. So when they went to the AHS from regional boards, dietitians could no longer offer programming, couldn't run the programming themselves. And so organizations like ours are funded through AHS to do the like on the ground program operation. So things like community kitchens and Good Food Club fall under that. So, and I have in-kind support as well from AHS. And then we also get a lot of our food for our kitchens through the food bank. And then we have a small budget from our granting that we can use for things that are not available. But part of, like my community kitchen leaders know, we try to use things that are available from the food bank because a lot of the people that we're serving are accessing the food bank, and we want them to know how to use those foods to prepare healthy meals.
I see everybody's been sharing. Are there any other questions?
Allison, I just had a quick question because you said that you have a food forest, which quite piqued my interest. And I was just curious how big it is and how did you get funding for that? Or did you need funding for that?
Well, we run everything like so cheaply and we have so many volunteers that are really keen. And so when we decided to do a food forest, it was some community members that asked for it. And we had kind of the one corner of our community garden had some trees already in it that we couldn't remove because the property is not ours. It's loaned to us from Alberta Health Services. It was just originally it was a grassy area behind their parking lot, behind the health unit. And so we had turned it into plots, but because a lot of those plots there had these large trees and had some shade issues, nobody ever wanted to have them as garden plots. They didn't produce really well for traditional gardening. And so we decided to use those as a food forest. And we had a couple community members who were keen to see it happen. And so what they did was actually organized a weekend workshop on permaculture and food forests. So people paid to come and learn how to create a food forest in their yard. They did the labor, and then we bought the plants. And this person also had been growing plants out in their farm property and brought in a bunch of things. And then we had a local permaculturalist actually donated his time for teaching for part of it. Maybe that was actually the rainwater. We might have actually had to pay. I think we did pay someone to come in and teach that original class, but that's how they put it in. So we provided the land and the payment for the actual supplies, and then people learning how to do it. That covered the cost or the time of the labor to input it. And then we've just had volunteers maintaining it ever since. And actually we incorporate the maintenance into the workshops. So when we have workshops about like plant identification and like maintaining plants, like pruning and starting things from cuttings and stuff like that, we use the food forest for that. Or even we had kids programming where they made like chickweed pesto, you know, so you're getting kids to do weeding and then teaching them how to eat the weeds. So we just kind of try to always do that kind of education and incorporating the work into the activities.
That's great. And how many years has it been going now?
I think we're in our 6th year. So it's still, you know, it's not fully established. We do still have to do some maintenance on it. But I went this spring and did some weeding. And I weeded a huge section that had knee-high weeds in really probably half an hour because of all of the compost and all of the stuff you're pulling out. You're just laying it down, and the ground was so soft. Like I've never been able to just hand pull stuff out like that in my life, and I've been gardening for years and years. So it's actually pretty easy to work in. So and you get a crowd. Like we'd say, oh, we're going to have a work bee at the food forest on Saturday at 10, and 5 or 7 people would show up, and you work for a couple hours and you've made a huge dent in it because it's easy to take care of.
So is the food forest mainly fruit trees, or is it like other stuff too?
Well, we have a few, I think they're maybe ash that were there. And then we planted apple and pear are the main bigger trees. And then we've got like the shrubbery layer. We've got haskap and all kinds of, currants and all kinds of those. And then we do put in some annuals. Usually we plant some tomatoes and stuff. And then we've got kind of ground cover plants too. Strawberries and mint and a variety of shade plants that are sometimes they're ones that you can eat when they're just coming out, when they're just growing, but are also ornamental. And then we have it's surrounded by, so in Medicine Hat we have a lot of deer, like a lot of urban deer, and they're not afraid of people at all. And so we have to fence our gardens, which is quite costly. But in doing that, we have the chain link around, and we have grapevines around two sides as well, because we get the heat for grapes down here. So we try to utilize all the space. Unfortunately, most of our gardens are locked, but that one is open to the public, and we have had theft. Like we've had people dig out bushes and remove them. But that's getting less common as the stuff gets bigger. It was kind of in the first 2 or 3 years when stuff was really small. Someone would go to the garden and discover, oh, we've lost more bushes, someone dug them out. But our biggest issue, I would say now, is people thinking things are weeds and removing them when they're actually not, because they're maybe unusual species that people aren't used to seeing. So they think they're helping by going in and weeding, but they're actually removing like edible plants or things we want in there for the biosystem. Any other questions? I have 3 more minutes.
Thanks so much, Allison. I have one question.
Okay.
That organization that dehydrates food in case there's emergencies is Prairie. I missed the second part.
Prairie Gleaners.
Gleaners. Okay.
So there's I want to say at least 4 of these across Canada. They have huge dehydrators, and because we have the greenhouses and we also live like in an agricultural area where we have a lot of lentils and chickpeas grown, what they do is they get the seconds from the greenhouses, and it's all done by volunteers. They hand chop up all the vegetables, and they put them in these huge dehydrators. They dehydrate them, and then they mix them with either lentils or chickpeas and put them they'll keep forever. They put them in big bags, and then they have sea cans. And then when they have a full sea can, they sent, when there was a tsunami in Malaysia, they actually now are sending them these sea cans up north because of the food insecurity issue in the far north. And then what you do is you just cook it in water, and it rehydrates all the vegetables and cooks the lentils and the chickpeas. You have to add your own seasonings, but it can be thinned out a lot to be soup, or it can be left thicker like a stew. And so they ship those in sea cans all over the world whenever there's, I think Pakistan, there was an earthquake and they sent one over there so people would have food, because it's complete. It's got vegetables and protein and everything, and it can be kept because it's dried, doesn't need refrigeration. So yeah, I think there's one in the Lower Mainland. I'm not sure where the other ones are. They're not very common, actually.
That was my first time hearing about it. Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Allison.
They have a website. You could look them up, Prairie Gleaners.
Sounds good. I will. Okay. Anyone else has questions for Allison? Last minute question before she has to leave? Well, thank you very much, Allison. Thank you. We appreciate
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Bye.
All right. So we have our last speaker for this evening, which is from Fresh Fruits. And I'll hand it over to you, Anita.
Perfect. Thanks, Claire. So it's great to hear about everyone's organizations and kind of everything they do in their community. And so I'm happy to be here and share a little bit about Fresh Fruits. And so I've worn many hats with Fresh Fruits kind of through its infancy and into now. And so I currently support as a grant writer. But before I actually dive into the history of Fresh Roots, I figured we maybe start with what Fresh Roots is. So we actually operate a mobile grocery store. And we do this by transforming decommissioned city buses and trucks into these grocery stores on wheels. And really the purpose is to create dignified and innovative ways to provide healthy and affordable food to community right directly into their community. And so our principles when we started crafting this journey really back in 2018, we really wanted to center it around a few things. We wanted to center around choice. So people could select their food just like you would in a grocery store, convenience, affordability, and also providing culturally relevant food. And so to give a little bit of a history about Fresh Roots, we actually were just a pilot concept under a charity called Leftovers Foundation, and this started in 2018. And if you're not familiar with Leftovers Foundation, it's kind of our sister organization, which is a food rescue organization. And so it really was just a concept led by our visionary, Lourdes Juan. And if you don't know her, definitely ping her. She definitely is a visionary and a leader in this space, really just very innovative. And so what we found was that working closely with community partners, including the City of Calgary social workers, we identified communities that experienced food insecurity, mainly relating to food access. So they lived in deserts, food deserts, or they had affordability issues, so financial constraints that restricted their purchasing power. And so in 2018, May 2018, we actually began our journey of Fresh Roots. We piloted in 4 locations, really targeting seniors and affordable housing across Calgary. After 5 months of just huge successes where we thought we would never make it because every day was just a journey, we really started to conceptualize what Fresh Roots could be, and taking this model of what we called originally a community mobile grocery store into this concept of Fresh Roots. And so in September, that's where we conceptualized Fresh Roots and started to begin our journey as our own nonprofit, separated from Leftovers Foundation. And so in 2019 of January, we finally incorporated as our own nonprofit and have been on this wild journey ever since 2019 to kind of bring our innovation to community with this mobile grocery store concept. And so Fresh Roots and with our mobile grocery concept serves about 2,000 community members per month. And so we do have a partner with a wholesaler, a food wholesaler. And so we take those, we kind of leverage that to really offer that affordability to members in the community. And so our pricing is roughly 24 to 45% below cost compared to large chain grocers. So we really are passing on our wholesale savings to members in the community who are facing challenges in access, both with affordability and like geography as well. So that's kind of Fresh Roots in our conception. I'll put the link in the chat so you can check it out. I know it's kind of hard to visualize what a mobile grocery store could look like, but it's super neat, and we're quite excited that we've come so far with really just a concept back in 2018. And so to answer the second question is, how has the pandemic really impacted our organization? Well, I think what we've realized, not realized, but really confirmed, is that the pandemic has exacerbated existing inequalities that communities that we operate in are facing. So we know that financial concerns is an issue, safety. And so for us, it was really just going back to that level to ensure that you felt safe being at our markets. I think that was our number one priority, to ensure that our communities members felt safe, our partners felt safe, and that you can continue to operate. And so logistically and operationally, that means we had to kind of reevaluate how we operated. So were staff equipped with the appropriate PPE? Did customers and participants feel safe coming into an indoor space like a grocery store, even though it was like a makeshift grocery store? Were they comfortable? And so really addressing some of those challenges early on. In addition to changing kind of our operations, we responded and also initiated an emergency food box early on during the pandemic. And this emergency food box really was to address a solution, provide a solution to food access for those who were unable to leave their homes. So within our small time frame of operating this emergency food box, we delivered approximately 5,500 food boxes to community or to individuals around Calgary. So it goes to show kind of the need that we need to address these kind of issues that emerged through COVID-19. Unfortunately, we also had to scale down our operations because we were in the community. We realized that it is a need, but we were faced with extreme challenges as a growing nonprofit. And so we had to scale down some of our operations in Calgary and Edmonton just with the increasing health measures and really threatened our longevity. So we kind of had to reshift and rethink about how we were going to operate. And today we continue to operate in these communities to ensure that we do have affordable and healthy food access for these people. At the same time, I think, Lauren's mentioned it, Allison's mentioned it. It really unified our community, unified the people, our partners, the players in this space to really address these concerns. So we continue to recognize and know that this is a really important need and that this isn't going to go away. The importance of healthy, affordable food is continuing to be a priority, even as we jump out of COVID-19. And last but not least, we do operate with other partners. So we're not just a mobile grocery store. We operate, for example, with the Alex Food Center in Calgary, making sure we set up shop kind of in their parking lot to ensure that that community and the people there, when they go pick up their children, we're offering that convenience so that they can kind of do everything in one go and not having to get a babysitter or do all the other things to kind of make sure that you can go to the grocery store. So we do partner with organizations to help support that food access as well. Our mobile grocery store really is our main program, but within that concept of our mobile grocery store, we do operate 2 other kind of smaller programs that we're hoping to see grow. And so one of them is actually a Fresh Kits. It's called Fresh Kits. So similar to your good food boxes or your meal prep type of subscriptions, we do offer something like that called Fresh Kits at our markets as well. And so that cost savings and everything is packaged in one place, and then those cost savings are also applied to those meal kits as well. And the second is our community wholesale program, and obviously with other nonprofits, other charities facing challenges in terms of fundraising and just having funds to support programming. We also pass our wholesale savings to other organizations. So they can purchase food directly from us, for example, and then can use that food for their programming. Knowing that, Cisco, which is that, or Good Food, I think it's Good Food, or Gordon Food, sorry, those large chain suppliers just won't support like really small organizations with limited food purchasing. So we also kind of alleviate that gap where they can purchase from us and then they have that opportunity to get those savings instead of buying, I don't know, tons and tons of pounds of eggs, which won't last, which is too much for their programming. They can purchase less that and serves that kind of need. So hopefully that's described a little bit about Fresh Fruits and kind of how we've adapted and changed with the pandemic, and happy to answer any questions.
Did you say how many you have in your fleet? How many of these grocery revamped buses or whatever you have?
Yeah, absolutely. I always mix up how many we have in our fleet. I believe we have 1 bus. So that's a city bus that was refurbished to be at that grocery store. And then I believe we have 3 trucks in our fleet.
Thanks, Anita. I always thought that Fresh Fruits was more of a, social enterprise. So I didn't realize it was set up as a not-for-profit. And that's a whole other webinar about what is a social enterprise, but which I'm sure you're very well aware of. And so you have a relationship with a wholesaler, which is how you're able to access affordable produce. Do they have an ethic of sourcing locally, or are they able to, what is their ethic for their food sourcing?
Yeah, great question. I don't want to put words in my mouth or their mouth, but from what I understand from that wholesaler is they mainly work with BC and Alberta farmers, and so they do try to support like local within Canada. Where do you find funding for fresh roots? That is a great question. I think if anyone has suggestions, let us know. We're a nonprofit, so we really can't leverage some of those charity dollars that other organizations face. So we do seek donations from donors like yourselves or other companies who are working in this food space, so sponsorships. But also grants. We are heavily involved in grants, and my job as a grant writer is to kind of help support, getting those funds from whether that be the government or other grants across Canada.
I just want to say that this is such, the populations you're reaching with this initiative is so, it's wonderful. And I was a university student, and at my university, fresh fruits came, and even for students, it's hard to access foods when there's many barriers. So it's not just to communities, but when you come to schools as well, it's quite wonderful to see how big a mobile grocery store can have such positive impacts.
Yeah, no, thanks, Claire, for reminding me. I should also mention that we don't stipulate like an income level or any of those pieces. So we do strategically target like these food insecure, food desert communities, but we do welcome all. And I think that's really important to emphasize, in that dignified choice, convenience, and culturally relevant food principles that we go to, or that we kind of vision and live by. And with Claire's comment, we do operate pre-COVID, we did operate on campus at U of C, Bow Valley, and I believe U of A. So we know that food access is not just a seniors and that kind of community problem. It's really everywhere. And so students also face that challenge. And so that's kind of why we operate in multiple different areas, ensuring that members of the community do have healthy food access, but again, ensuring that it's all inviting and welcoming for that inclusive environment.
Now I really want to go on your website and see what one of these food trucks looks, or your grocery store looks like.
Yes, please do. It's so hard to describe, but if you click on our 2020 impact report, you can really just see like this concept of this bus, and it just blows my mind on how something like this could operate. And it's we see a lot of these types of models in other cities in Canada, actually. So I know Toronto has a few of these mobile grocery stores, and in the States in particular, they do have a large mobile grocery store kind of innovation there as well. But I think in Alberta, we really struggle with weather, right? And so we're trying to find innovation not only with our truck in the summer, but working in those community spaces. So we can transform even just bit like community centers into a mobile grocery store, working directly with community as well. So yeah, it's very interesting to see kind of that concept evolve since 2018, and definitely check out our 2020 impact report for that picture and just kind of seeing what we're up to, because it's hard to describe without actually seeing it in its all its glory and just innovation there.
Anita, I'm curious if you work with the Alex in Calgary.
We are one of we partner with them. Yeah. So Alex is one of the locations that we operate one of our stops in. And so that is one of the partners that we operate in for having that mobile grocery store concept right at their doorstep. So.
And do you work with any of the Indigenous? I know actually Fresh Roots was coming into Stoney Nation here for a while. I don't know if you still are.
Yeah, I'm mixing them up right now because I'm actually not too heavily involved in operations But I believe we do operate in Stoney, Sutina, and Pekani.
Well, thank you very much, Anita, and also to Lauren for being here today and speaking on behalf of the organization. Anyone has any questions for either of them? Well, they have websites, and their contact information is also on their website. So do reach out if you need any information or have any questions. And thank you all for being here this evening. We really appreciate the turnout, and it's great to just learn about each other's organization and share ideas. So our next webinar is coming up next month. So stay tuned for that, and we hope to see you all soon. Have a great evening.